Good evening. The purpose of this presentation is to analyze and critique NAPLAN from a psychological constructivist perspective, focusing on NAPLAN's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats from this perspective. It should be noted that there will be some crossover between the key principles and strategies of psychological constructivism and social constructivism, due to the theories being somewhat similar. The main difference between the two theories is that psychological constructivists are concerned with how individual learners construct their own knowledge through their environment, as opposed to social constructivists who emphasize a focus on how students acquire knowledge through social interaction.
There will be four main aspects to this presentation. The first is to provide an in-depth analysis of constructivism. The second is to provide a deep analysis of NAPLAN. The third is to analyze NAPLAN's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats from a psychological constructivist perspective. The presentation will conclude with some final thoughts. The theory of psychological constructivism is concerned with how learners develop their knowledge, identity, and beliefs through the learning process. This idea of how students construct who they are and what they know was influenced by three main theorists: Jean Piaget, John Dewey, and Jerome Bruner. Piaget's thoughts regarding how students learn influenced the pedagogical practices of psychological constructivists. Specifically, Piaget's theory that students obtain knowledge through a process called assimilation and accommodation. Put simply, assimilation refers to how students interpret new information through their previously held beliefs, which Piaget called schemas. Accommodation refers to how a student's schema may adapt to comprehend new information that was conflicting to their previously held schema. For example, a student learning a secondary language might use their knowledge in order to incorrectly presume the pronunciation of a new word. This would be assimilation. Accommodation in this case would occur when the student's pronunciation is corrected, which would cause said student to have to adjust their previously held schema. Piaget's idea that the student's schemas go through a process of disequilibrium to equilibrium greatly influenced the pedagogical practices used by psychological constructivists. John Dewey's major contribution to psychological constructivism came from his philosophy of pragmatism. Put simply, Dewey believed that students learn best through participation rather than observation. He was against traditional pedagogies which saw the teacher as a lecturer within the classroom, whom were there to fill their students with knowledge like empty vessels. Instead, Dewey viewed the teacher as a facilitator of education. Their role is to guide students into developing their metacognitive skills to become independent learners. He did this through a strategy he called inquiry-based learning, which is a strategy designed to help students develop the metacognitive skills to become independent learners. This is done by the teacher proposing a question or topic at the start of the class and then guiding students to find their own answers. This form of student-based learning is a fundamental teaching method used by psychological constructivists. Bruner's theory of discovery learning emphasized that students obtain knowledge when they can make sense of and apply what they have learned. This happens when connections are made between past learning and meaningful context. Bruner's thoughts on the learning process was influenced by Lev Vygotsky's theory of scaffolding. Although scaffolding is known as a social constructivist theory, it also aligns with psychological constructivism because the theory supports students self-regulating their own learning through teacher support. Scaffolding is applied to psychological constructivism by having teachers create learning content based on students' previous experiences. Providing students with content they have some knowledge in allows them to develop their own learning pathway and make their own conclusions, thus adhering to the thought of student self-regulated learning. The following are the key concepts to psychological constructivism. Constructivists believe that learning occurs when new information comes into context with existing information in order to form new connections and new understanding. Constructivist classrooms use content that is scaffolded off of previous knowledge so that students can be independent with their learning. The learning theory emphasizes the use of authentic tasks within meaningful context. That is because constructivists believe knowledge is best retained when it is meaningful to students. Authentic tasks occur when they are intrinsically motivating or have real-world application and are student-centered. Constructivists believe that learning should be student-centered and that students are capable of self-regulating their own learning process. This is supported by a pedagogy which develops students' metacognitive skills by providing content that is scaffolded and uses the teaching strategies of inquiry-based learning, problem-based learning, and reciprocal teaching. And as previously discussed, psychological constructivists believe that teacher's role in the classroom is as a facilitator and not a lecturer. The teacher's role is to help students develop their metacognitive skills to become independent learners. The second part of the presentation concerns an analysis of NAPLAN. The National Assessment Program for Literacy and Numeracy, or NAPLAN for short, is a test developed by the Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, or CARA for short, to measure years 3, 5, 7, and 9 student skills in literacy and numeracy. NAPLAN tests are designed to test students' capabilities regarding their fundamental literacy and numeracy skills. There are 4 tests in total: reading, writing, language conventions, including spelling, grammar, and punctuation, and numeracy. The duration of the tests differ between year levels. ACARA created NAPLAN to test students' skills in literacy and numeracy against a national benchmark. The purpose of this was to identify and assist students below said benchmark. Students respond to test questions via multiple choice answers, short and written responses, or by dragging and dropping answers. NAPLAN's test questions are largely decontextualized, meaning they are out of context and neither authentic or relatable to students' lives. This information will be important in the later analysis. After completion of the NAPLAN test, students and educational stakeholders will receive a report like this, which informs them whether a student is performing above or below national benchmark for literacy and numeracy. The small black dot indicates what band the student's scores fell into. Bands are essentially a range of scores. The national benchmark is indicated by the small black arrow, or the light blue area of the scale indicates where the majority of students in the child's year level are performing. Essentially, this information tells educational stakeholders where a student is performing in regards to their peers and national standards. The reliability, fairness, and validity of the test is ensured in the following ways. Reliability is ensured by having teachers, school deputies, and principals overwatch the test. It is in each state and territory's guidelines that tests must be adhered to in accordance with CARA's standards and processes. The fairness of the test is debatable. However, CARA has put in place measures to assist students who have a disability or English as a secondary language. Some modes of assistance include having a scribe, having extra time for rest breaks, and using technology. In the case of adjustments to the test, students must meet specific criteria and be given approval from CARA first. Validity is shown by having the questions reflect the core elements of curriculum standards for literacy and numeracy amongst the year levels. In other words, the questions in the test are adequately chosen to be within the student's capabilities. Furthermore, NAPLAN tests are created by experts from across Australia. Specialist writers create the test questions, making sure the curriculum coverage is appropriate to the relevant year levels. The test items are then trialed by sample groups of students to decide whether the test should be finalized, thus ensuring the quality of the test. The final aspect of this presentation will be to analyze NAPLAN's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats from a psychological constructivist perspective. The strengths. Psychological constructivists appreciate NAPLAN as a form of formative assessment that is used to gather data on students' capabilities in literacy and numeracy. This data can then be used to develop teaching and learning strategies that are appropriate for individual students and that can improve their literacy and numeracy abilities. Due to NAPLAN's results being public, schools and teachers are provided the opportunity to re-evaluate their teaching strategies. If students in a teacher's classroom are underperforming, the teacher can ask themselves why that is and then re-evaluate the effectiveness of their teaching strategies. The weaknesses. Assuming that all students will reach the same level of capability at the same time in order to pass the same test goes directly against the belief of constructivists. Psychological constructivists believe that learning occurs within authentic, meaningful contexts. A complaint amongst school teachers and administrators is that NAPLAN's test questions are largely decontextualized and inauthentic. Psychological constructivists believe that knowledge is obtained when it is filtered through students' previous experiences. The questions NAPLAN presents are, however, as said, decontextualized and inauthentic. Although the test somewhat differentiates for learners who have English as a disability or English as a secondary language, there is little to no differentiation provided for varying learner types. The opportunities. Governments are known to provide financial support to schools that perform poorly on NAPLAN. The extra financial support can provide schools with extra resources which can enrich student learning. A crucial idea in constructivism is that students' interest to learn can be enhanced by positive self-efficacy. NAPLAN's results can show students their improvement over time due to students taking the test multiple times throughout their schooling. This can promote in students an intrinsic motivation to continue improving. The threats. The high-stakes pressure of NAPLAN, accompanied with the fact that results are displayed publicly, forces many schools to take time out of their regular curriculum to prepare students for the test. This is detrimental because it changes the classroom from being student-centered, which is encouraged by constructivists, to being teacher-centered, as teachers use methods such as rote learning to prepare their students for the test. Furthermore, the pressure placed on students by schools may negatively impact their mental health. There's also the threat of the student's self-efficacy being negatively impacted due to poor performance in the test. In conclusion, this presentation has provided an in-depth understanding and analysis of the theories and thoughts of psychological constructivism and the purpose and creation of NAPLAN. The analysis of NAPLAN's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats from a psychological constructivist perspective revealed few positive elements and many negative. However, this does not mean that NAPLAN should be entirely abolished. As stated previously, there's opportunities for the test to assist students. Initial changes NAPLAN could make in order to follow the principles of psychological constructivism would be to restructure test questions in order to make them more authentic with real-world value, and also placing a greater emphasis